Thank you very much, everybody who is here. Happy to talk. The idea today is that we can go through what the playbook has been for the Portugal ecosystem in the past 10, 15 years to build the huge and better well-known ecosystem that it is today. So I'm really happy to be here with people that have been in this ecosystem for many, many years. So I'm here with Estefan, founder of Indigo Capital, and Edmund Ricardo, founder of Endeavor in Portugal. Okay? The first thing that I wanted to cover today is, well, what actually is the playbook of Portugal for doing startups? And maybe the first question would be for you, Estefan, like being one of the first that actually founded VC in this ecosystem, what was the signal that you saw that was the right moment to start investing in Portugal?
Well, you know, if you look back 15 years ago, 13 years ago, you could see that there was a set of founders in Portugal that were thinking globally. This was when the cloud revolution kind of got going and SaaS became a thing. And there were a few young people, namely my partner, Cristina Fonseca, who was supposed to be here today. You know, they were wanting to become global category leaders in this new age of cloud and SaaS. And so that was pretty unique. I think that was the first signal we had that showed that there was an embryo of an ecosystem, but there were no proper investors, let's say, at the beginning. There were some structures like incubators and accelerators starting to come up, and there was an intention also from the state to promote this new ecosystem. So, but the first thing and the central part of any ecosystem, as we all know, are the founders. And right after the founders, it's the money, because if you have ideas but have no money, you can't do anything. But the central part was the founders, and these, you know, they really started the big global initial success stories 15 years ago, more or less.
Yeah. I would say that talking specifically about Portuguese founders, this is where, because you have all of the experience. So what were those traits of founders that you saw from Portugal that made you think that it was the right moment to bring Endeavor also into Portugal?
So, you know, picking up on what Stefan mentioned, around the year 2009, 2010, right after the economic crisis, you would see like this wave of new companies coming up. And I think those are today's unicorns in the country. So they sort of pave the way for this new group of people to actually show and nurture the entrepreneurial culture. Endeavor has been in the country for the past 3 years, so we came in at a later moment where there's more maturity being seen in the market as well. And since we're a small market, what I think makes us different in a way of a sort of a Portuguese playbook is that companies are being built from Portugal to the world from inception, right? So they're not looking at the Portuguese market or even Iberian, but they're really looking at where else can we go with the company. And Portugal functions really well as a beta market, as a tester. And today I think there's a lot more infrastructure and support. There's good relationships with the universities, so the talent in Portugal, specifically the technical talent, is really high. So that's, I would say, one of the upsides of either building in Portugal or having a team there, because you can go to universities from Braga, Porto, Aveiro, Lisboa, Coimbra, and you find really good technical talent. You know, so that's part of the story.
Okay, great. There's always a role in the building of ecosystem that is the role of the first founders. You know, the how they come back into helping the next founders build. So what have you seen from this dynamic? Because one of the things that I also, of course, we wanted to bring into the table is the fact that a lot of these founders are US-based, are either US-based, London-based, etc. So especially at Endeavor, how do you take their time to actually come here back in Portugal again?
Well, what I've been seeing is when these pioneers started 15 years ago, you didn't really have a community there. So they had to build it from scratch, and there was no sort of international support network or structure because the founders that first went to Silicon Valley and elsewhere were back then non-existent virtually. So today I think there's actually, and this is an expression I heard the other day, a community for growth. So you actually have founders that are either residents out of Portugal that support founders that are building in Portugal, and they welcome them inclusively in their homes if they fly to the US or whatever they might be. I'm seeing also some of them actually having had liquidity events investing and being angels. Like a good example is Nuno Sebastião from Feedzai. He takes a lot of pride in saying that he's put first tickets in many of these companies that are now showing up. There's many other people like Cristina, Stefan's partner at Indico, that came back to Portugal as well and is now investing, but she's still building. So I think there's these really good lighthouses, like examples that pave the way for others to follow.
Okay, great. Stefan, what have you seen from founders from Portugal building elsewhere?
So it is true that from day one, the Portuguese founders, the most successful ones, not by chance, are the ones that kind of moved to the US. They saw the opportunity to grow in a huge market from day one, which is something that it was a bit different here in Spain until a few years ago. We're now seeing that. Yeah. But until a few years ago in Spain, people would always tell us, oh, it's Spain and then Latin America. I think I'm hearing that less and less. I'm hearing it more, let's do a big market and let's go to the US first. And I think for that also the funds that have been coming to Spain have been helping with that and the growth of the Spanish ecosystem. But the Portuguese founders that did that, many of them did stay in the US, the most successful ones, but some came back. And the ones that came back, some, like Nuno Sebastião or Diogo Mónica from another unicorn we invested called Anchorage Digital, they've been investing. And actually, I think Diogo has invested in, 100 plus companies, right? Cristina is inside Indico, so she invests through Indico, but nevertheless, there's this support network, which is not only the founders, it's also the fact that you've had the examples of startups, the ones that did well, but also the ones that did not do well, and people went on and did other startups with those sort of learning opportunities. And then there's also something that happened more in the last 3-4 years since the pandemic, which was the relocation of major outside companies, and not only Google and Microsoft and so on, which were already there for many years, but other unicorns that established operations in Lisbon. Yeah. And they have also been promoting, a culture of growth and knowledge. And then you have a vast number of people that were not necessarily from startups, but that have moved with their families from all over the world to Lisbon, not only from California, but a little bit from all over Europe and elsewhere. And so the type of skills that we used to miss in the ecosystem, namely sales and marketing, go-to-market and design and user experience and so on and so forth, that were not there 10 years ago, you can now find people, great assets. So all that concentration of knowledge helps that the Portuguese founders that were already international become more competent and more ambitious. Yep. And so I think that finally we're seeing the first generation, when the founders start in their early 20s, sometimes it's like the whole thing starts again, right? Mm. They have to learn again. And before it was really difficult because they had nobody to learn with. Yes, they could talk to the VCs and so on, but it's always better that they have their communities and trust other founders. And now I think finally we're seeing founders helping other founders, not necessarily to the point where we've seen already here. I think here it's more broad, and of course California and so on, it's like a permanent school of founders. Yeah. But I think it's much better. And the truth is, those initial unicorns, which are now I think 7 or 8, I think we've invested in 6 out of those, they are an incredible lighthouse, and they're very inspiring, and they're big unicorns, right? The Portuguese unicorns are $10 billion companies, $5 billion companies, so on. So these are big, sort of successful, at least on valuation, the exits we shall see. But these are successful stories, right, compared to any country in Europe.
Yeah, well, I would say that given the amount of people in Portugal and the amount of unicorns, probably the density there it's very, very interesting. But what are the things that have, in your experience, happened in order to allow this to happen? To all the people that have come here, was it a change in the narrative from the government? Was it a change in the mentality of Portuguese people? What was it that allowed this to happen? And what is missing in order to have that global infrastructure since day one for Portuguese founders?
I think there's a bit of I would say all of the above. I wouldn't say you cannot single out, an initiative like the Web Summit back in the day, 10 years ago when it started, either brought a number of people to Lisbon and placed Lisbon specifically in the map. But you're also seeing other cities with very strong companies being built out of the city, like the case of Sword Health in Porto. And some of the founders actually moved for a period of time to SF or to the US, but they now realize they can go back and forth. They don't need to be on a permanent basis there. And I think that sort of self-reinforcement also allows for other founders to say, no, I can be living in Portugal and I can still build a global business. I think ambition has changed. I think over the years, people realize that it's possible to build something bigger and larger, and it's okay to do it and move forward. Support structures has also changed. I think Endeavor is one of them. And I think the global community helps elevate the individuals, but also the ecosystem itself, because we work, typically we look at companies post-Series A, it's sort of like our sweet spot, but we also help companies earlier in the funnel. And we actually have initiatives for next generation, because we're also looking at what happens when, we just got a recent company selected, and it's public, they closed the round, and the founders are in the mid-20s, right? 25, 26.
Right.
So you're seeing a lot more, which was unusual at that age and at that level of growth that they're showing 10 or 15 years ago. I think also, AI, but technology itself has changed and has become a very strong enabler. So you don't have to be geographically in a certain place, you can actually do it there. I think access to capital is very, very important. You're seeing other Portuguese funds, more mature as well, more experienced, but also non-Portuguese funds coming into the country and investing. These are some of the ingredients, and I would finish with one that Stefan already mentioned, we're also seeing there's somewhat of a momentum happening right now in the country, which is you're seeing a lot of people that are non-Portuguese actually moving to Portugal, but they're not retired. So they're in a different stage of life. They're not empty nesters. They still have their kids. They put their kids through school in Lisbon, Porto, the Algarve up north. And they're also keen on either investing or building something new. We're building bridges with that community and between the Portuguese born and these new Portuguese. And I think that's probably one of the challenges that we need to face head on, is how do we integrate and sort of allow or foment this exchange of knowledge, of capital, of ability to build. That is, the number of Americans now living in Portugal is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think building on what Ricardo just said, I think I can try to touch on a couple of other points. One is the role of government and the state. I think clearly, over the last 15 years, every single government tried to help, and they tried to sort of support the ecosystem. Of course, not everything went well. We know that sometimes, if you do not design the right incentives, things take twists and turns that are not expected or not great.
Yeah.
But the fact that over 15 years, every single government tried to help the ecosystem, promote it in many different ways, in bringing the Web Summit, in establishing programs for accelerators, in driving incubators, and then also in providing capital in different types of programs, some of them not very well designed. I think it's getting much better, right? We're getting into sort of state-of-the-art capital structures from the state into funds. But just the fact that they're trying to do that, and that they're more and more open to work with the private sector and listen to... I'm also the chair of the Private Equity and VC Association currently, so we have a very close relationship with the Portuguese Development Bank and with the government, and they are super open to listening. Startup Portugal also had a great role in the last few years, because there was the startup law, the definition itself of startup, and a number of other things that were achieved on a political level and support. And so I think what we've been missing until now is the private capital, right? And that is way harder to unlock. I think we're on a stage now where the public capital, with the announcement of a big fund of funds of public money, hopefully done on a market basis, where track record counts and where things are done as if it was a big private LP, more or less, with very few strings attached and so on. I think the private capital is what needs to come after. So to your question of what's missing, what is missing is private capital. And I think here, it's not only a Portuguese or a Spanish problem, it's an European problem. The big difference to the United States, and as you know, we have all these unicorns in the US, within the Indico portfolio. And what we see is that just the depth of capital, the amount of capital that they can get in the US is incredible, from the very early stages until the very last stages. And at Indico we do from pre-seed to pre-IPO. We have funds for all sorts of stages, focusing on Portugal, Spain, and Italy, and the diaspora, which are all these Portuguese, Spanish, and Italians all over the world, and also the foreigners in these countries. And what we see is that when they tap into the US market, they are able to attract not only more capital, but they actually get into a real single market, which is not the case in Europe. It is not a single market, and this is something that Europe is trying to solve, but is complicated. A much lighter regulation, so much more business friendly, for the good and for the bad, but for startups it's good. And just way more access to capital. And for capital to reach startups, it needs to reach funds first. We are the gatekeepers of that capital because we are a regulated industry. And so what is really missing in Portugal, and less so in Spain, but also, and less so in the north of Europe, but also, is the fact that we have very few pension funds. The universities have no endowments. The family offices do not invest in this asset class. So for all the talk in Europe about the Draghi report and the importance of catching up, if there's no money, there's no catching up. We can have all the smart investors, investors and very smart, obviously, entrepreneurs and very driven and even more ambitious than 10 years ago and so on. But they're not going to make it if they have no money. So what happens now is obviously the really, really good ones, normally they end up in the hands of US investors. We basically deliver our companies to the US. That's what we do. We are suppliers to the US. For this not to happen, we need to have way more capital with no strings attached, private capital that is competitive so that we can deploy not only to more companies, but larger checks to attract more talent into our startups so that they can keep on being here. So this is what's still missing, and I think Portugal has a big problem in that sense. We've attracted 300 million, close to 300 million to our funds, but our companies have attracted 3.5 billion because they get it from the US, right? So 10 times more than what we've put in has gone into our companies because it's US capital, right?
I would say that we can all agree that there is always this conversation between founders, like when is the right time to move outside of Portugal, right? So I don't know if you have seen this conversation between founders at Endeavor, and what is the general feeling of, is it like I want to stay in Portugal but I can't, or I need to leave Portugal in order to be big?
Well, I give you the example of Sword, which is arguably one of the largest unicorns in the country, and all the co-founders are living in Porto, right? So, but again, I think they move back and forth. They have teams in the US and elsewhere in the world. So I think that need, and they need, with that I agree with Stefan, I think they need to spend time in the United States, and in particular in Silicon Valley, to build their own networks over there, right? Where I think, and going back to your question, I think we have support. Startup Portugal is here, and they're doing their role. You have Unicorn Factory in Lisbon, you have the Founders, another initiative in Porto, you have Startup Braga, so both regional and at national level, you have agents that are reinforcing the agenda of entrepreneurship in the country, which, by the way, it was much lighter 10 or 15 years ago, so I think it's present. I think it's now much more of a reality and in the mind but I think, again, there's a lot more to be done. If I had a magic wand and I could make a wish, I would like to see more of a master plan that survives the political cycles and has like a long plan for the long run. I think, as you know, VC is a patient capital. This is not something you build in a day, so you need to have something that actually everybody backs up equally, that has a national vision and it allows you to deploy and actually see it grow. And then it's very sort of metric and data driven, so you can actually measure how you're progressing, which is something that we expect from the companies we select and support, and I think we should do the same at country level. There's a lot that has been accomplished, but I think the next decade will demand much more.
One of the things that we have mentioned quite a lot is it's also that feeling of I want to build from Portugal and etc. But I also believe, and this is one of the things that is the whole thesis of what we do at Bind Venture Capital, is that one of the things that Portugal got very right since like many years ago is the fact that they stopped looking at Portugal as just one country and started looking at that Iberian region and even South European region. And this is one of the probably basic theories of Indico. So would you care, Stefan, to dive a little bit deeper into why this thesis of supporting and looking into all of Southern Europe as one region makes sense for us VCs?
Yes, I mean, it doesn't make sense in all cases, but it makes sense in a lot of cases for sure, right? And the sheer fact that it's such a small market in Portugal drives the founders to do that. But it's not only that. I think that in other countries across Europe and probably even more in Spain and Italy than in Portugal, the clients are a little bit more open to trying it out, right? I think that one of the problems we still have also in Portugal is the corporates are a little bit conservative. So one of the things I see here, really good in Spain is that the corporates are very supportive. They invest into the funds. They have all these programs. I think in Portugal sometimes the corporates do, an accelerator or something like that, which is kind of small, but it's not really putting big money into the system, right? I've seen here in Spain, Telefónica and many other big banks, putting real money behind funds. Their funds, but also quite often independent funds, like Indico, Spanish equivalent, right? And so I think that is missing, because that is what you need you need the corporates to open the doors to the startup founders, because this is clearly one of the other big differentiations in the US, right? You are a little startup in the US, you are solving a problem, Cisco will open the doors and will let you sort of solve their problem, right? And I think, that conservatism in Portugal is still bigger than in Spain, for example, so it's natural that it's easier to expand here into big corporates which are used to that. The other factor is exits. I think that when you come into like Spain or Italy, which are much bigger markets, you expose yourself to eventually being acquired. Right. Not every company is going to do an IPO in the Nasdaq, right? And we have to leave, we have to exit. That's how VCs make money. It's not when you get in, it's when you get out, right? And we have a set period to do that. We only have 10 years. And you cannot leave it to year 9.5, right? You have to sort of prepare things in advance. I think the M&A market here in Spain is much, much stronger. And so when you are exposed to the Spanish market, you are also exposed to exit opportunities. So we also encourage companies to come here.
Okay, that's actually what we believe also, like internally at Bind. It's like it makes a lot of sense to collaborate in all of these regions because a lot of corporates are also collaborating in all of these regions as one. But what would you say from Endeavor is the view of founders? Like, do Portuguese founders see Spanish and Italian and South European founders as a collaboration, as a competition, maybe because they're probably fighting for the same clients?
Well, I would add that Endeavor is present exactly on those geographies. Exactly. So like Portugal, I would say more recently, we've been around for 36 months, but the Endeavor Spain team and structure has been for, I think, 12 years. So, but it's interesting that we both share same interest in supporting and elevating the local ecosystems, and corporates are in both boards, like Santander, Portugal is on our board in Portugal, and then BBVA is on the Spanish Endeavor Spain's board. So I think it shows also the good relationship that we have, and we have quite a good mix of diversity of people backing it up. What I see now is that, oftentimes we have companies that look at the Southern European market, and they're both present in Iberia, but also in Italy.
Yeah, exactly.
And the offices in Madrid or in Milan can help those companies to expand and support locally. This is something that ourselves as teams talk about quite often, because we want to be de facto one Endeavor support structure independently wherever it operates. We have 10 countries in Europe. Yeah. Where we're seeing incredible growth coming up is from countries like Poland and the Ukraine. Incredible, like companies like 11 Labs coming out of Poland, or Headway coming out of the Ukraine with Ukrainian founders, oftentimes not living in Kiev. And it's pretty impressive, the speed, the wealth creation, just the ambition that they have, which I think it's something that we share, and we try to also introduce some of the local founders to these founders, so that they also can share their experience and sort of pave the way for others to follow and avoid the pitfalls on their growth journey. Right. I would definitely like to see more happen together, right? I think it's a collective effort and not like a single out each country for its own.
Right. So maybe we have time for one or two questions, but one question that I definitely wanted to ask today to you both is something that we have already spoke, maybe a little bit in this talk, but it's the fact that both the internet, the AI, and now all of these laws that are bringing a lot of Americans, expats, etc., especially into Lisbon, for example, they're of course bringing a lot of opportunity for the ecosystem. So what do you think this ecosystem, with everything that is allowing now AI technology and new infrastructure, is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? What is your bet as entrepreneur and VCs?
Well, I would guess that we're going to see the second stage of major companies coming up. Okay. There was already a second stage, right? The first stage was 12 years ago, the first 3 or 4 unicorns. Then there was a second stage of unicorns being created 5 years ago, more or less, 6 years ago. And now I think we're going to see the third stage. When we launched our fifth fund 2.5 years ago, we were a bit unsure about the quality of deal flow. And we actually programmed the fund to be more focused on sort of later stage opportunities, not only in Portugal, but in South Europe. And we thought we were going to have something like 15 companies in the portfolio, because we normally lead or co-lead, so we don't do 30 positions or 50 with small tickets. We really, we have conviction on a few companies and we back them, quite significantly. And now we're finding ourselves in a position where we have way too many companies that we wanted to invest, even out of Portugal just. We're like, oh my God, I cannot choose all of them, because we only have, we're going to do maybe 20, which is a bit more than what we normally do in our funds, just because we don't want to miss out, right? So I'm pretty sure that out of this new wave of AI companies, because we've been investing in AI for 10 years, but some of our early AI companies were defeated by the new AI companies. Right. And so this new wave of AI companies, some of them are really, really promising. And again, the amount of ambition is even higher. But it's always good to have ambition and some feet on the ground also, so you don't go crazy. But I think it's very healthy, and it's much better. And it echoes what I see here in Spain also, across Madrid, Barcelona, Bilbao, Valencia, Malaga, Seville. It's really powerful what's happening. So I think we're going to see great things.
Great. Ricardo, some last thoughts about
that? I would love to see some liquidity coming into the market, exits, something that will show up on the front page of a newspaper, but actually show the ability for co-founders to cash in, for founding teams, so that they can go on and invest or become serial entrepreneurs. I think that would be one. The other one that I'm seeing is non-Portuguese founders building from Lisbon to the world, like Cody from Bounce, Zach from Ascend. These are just 2 examples of Americans living and working out of Lisbon. I would love to see a company that actually has DNA from both. So you'd have like an American and a Portuguese building something, and that the relevance of their own journey would bring value and there's a positive spillover to the country.
All right. Yeah. So, Stefan, Ricardo, thank you very much for today. We got the opportunity to talk about a country that was bailed out by the IMF 15 years ago, and now today is producing unicorns. So I'm really happy to be in this ecosystem, and thank you very much to all.